great opportunity to hear ambitious talks about the environment and get sort of fired up. But it's part of a very big programme that we have at this conference, and there's more details on the leaflets around, and we've got 3 more events tomorrow. So please come to one of those, and apart from one event, they're all here, sort of our hub. We are going to hear from our sponsor, Cala, in a second, and then Paul will say a few words. And thank you very much for that, because with the sponsorship and support of organisations we work with, we can do our work, not just at conference, but throughout the year. And if anyone does want to work with us, we would very much welcome that, and so please come and see us afterwards. And then lastly, I wanted to just say, if there's anyone, not a member of SERA, we hope you all are members of SERA, but some people haven't quite joined yet. So please do so. Again, that helps us do our work. It helps you feed into the process. It feeds into the ideas, and you get copies of our publication, New Ground. Let's put it out there. Which this fantastic one was recently on how we tackle plastics, and we have our regular blog and our website, etc. And as I said, many events throughout the year. So that's a bit about SERA, and then finally about this the format of this evening. So what we're having 5-minute speeches from a great range of speakers from across the party, talking about the anniversary of the Climate Change Act, about ambitious environmental policy ahead, and where we need to go. Now, it's the 10th anniversary of the Climate Change Act this year. We will be holding another event, or an event later in the year with Ed Miliband to celebrate the anniversary of that act on the day of its World Ascent on 26th of November. So, more details to follow. But anyway, so that's the format of what's going to be. We're going to have rapid speeches, and I'll just pass it over to Paul now, who's just going to say a few words, and then we'll get our main speakers up on the stage. Thanks a lot, Paul.
Good evening, everyone. Anyway, thank you, Jake. Thank you, Melly. I'm Paul Blacklock. I'm the Head of Strategy and Corporate Affairs for Caligas, and I'm both honoured and extremely grateful for this opportunity to address the SERA Rally at conference. In fact, this is the 3rd time I've done this, and we've sponsored the event before. Now, most of you are probably wondering what Cala is doing here, because you probably think of us as little blue and red bottles from camping and caravanning. Well, we actually do most of our business supplying gas to businesses and homes in the countryside that haven't got access to the gas grid, about 2 million properties. So, as a result of that, we have had a long-term and very keen interest in energy and climate change policy. Until now, much of the debate has been focused on power generation, where we're going to get our electricity from. But that's changing because of the huge progress that's been made on decarbonising power. The focus is now shifting onto how we heat our homes and businesses. Now, there's a particular policy challenge here, and I'm talking from almost 30 years involvement in the heating sort of industry, and the fact is that heat is really boring. So we've now got to obviously try and make it interesting. It's something which most of us take for granted and only really pay attention when it either doesn't work or it's costing too much. It's a little known and often ignored fact that the UK is the largest gas boiler market in Europe, and there's a huge domestic industry with sector-leading companies based here in Britain and employing many thousands of people, plus 100,000 or more heating installers that we will use in terms of keeping the boilers working in our homes. Policies which directly support these established British manufacturing and service industries will have the greatest beneficial impact on the economy at large and have the best chance of success while supporting UK jobs. The good news is that Labour has a really strong track record in this area through bringing forward policies which offer consumers solutions they understand, want and can afford. It was a Labour government which back in 2006 mandated the installation of high efficiency condensing boilers in British homes. It was also Labour which launched the extremely successful boiler scrappage scheme back in 2010, which took over 100,000 inefficient boilers off the wall within 3 months. And people save carbon emissions, but more importantly, they knocked about 25–30% off their energy bills. And as we all know, and as Jake's already mentioned, it was Labour that delivered the Climate Change Act, which we're celebrating here today, but it was also a Labour government which signed the UK up to the Kyoto Protocol in 1997, 30 years ago. I actually had the privilege of being at Kyoto, where CALA was doing some joint campaigning work with Greenpeace at the time. CALA has already started on our decarbonisation journey as we launched bio-LPG onto the UK market earlier this year, and we've a dedicated international team which is working on increasing the supply over the coming years, and our shareholder SHV has set an ambition for 100% of its energy products to come from renewable sources by 2040. So it's a very ambitious and global target. I think the message here is that we all have a part to play in delivering on the UK's climate change targets, including businesses. We at CALA look forward to continuing to work with SERA and the Labour Party at large on this fundamental issue. So here's to the next 30 years. Thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of the rally and your conference.
So we're going to hear first from Anneliese Dodds.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to follow on from Alan. It was great to hear and be reminded of some of Labour's policies. And as with so many areas of environmental policy, what we achieved when we were in government before wasn't just good for the environment. It was really, really important for a lot of very low-income people as well, who were then better able to heat their homes that before had been damp, disgusting. We changed that. We need to do it again when we get into government. Look, I'm just delighted to be here with all of you. I wish we could bottle the energy that is here in this room for the environment. We've got the passionate advocates for the environment from our DEFRA team. Obviously, we've got the Treasury team with me here. No Clive Lewis, who's working on environmental issues, would love to be here, but he can't for family reasons. He sends out his gratitude for all your campaigning. We've got the many backbenchers from amongst our SERA membership who are really passionate advocates for action for the environment, and of course our SERA officers too, and staff. And I really want to thank them for what has been a terrific programme of events so far at Labour Conference. If you can keep it up for the whole thing, I'll be really, really impressed. I have to say, after the karaoke that I wasn't taking part in last night, but I was hearing through my hotel floor, I'm feeling a little bit lacking in energy, but I'll do my best to keep it going for now. I really wanted to talk about what the Treasury can and should do, what our Shadow Treasury team is thinking about in terms of our future plan for government, and how we can make sure that green concerns aren't just an add-on, that they're really hardwired through our programme for government and our campaigning in Parliament as well. So I'm going to give 4 takeaways in 5 minutes on what we think Treasury should be doing and isn't doing at the moment. The first one is, it needs to get out of the way. The Treasury is an overweening department. Far too often it's blocking the kind of investment that we need for the long run because of short-term financial expediency. And a lot of the time that investment would be to promote our environment. It would be those schemes that we need for energy, green energy in particular. Bob Kersley, as many people will know, former head of the civil service in the UK, he's been working with the Treasury team on how we can really put that into practice, how we can have a better relationship with those people in government who are specifically tasked with promoting our environment, and how we can stop blocking those important long-range financial decisions that we need to take. And as part of that, we need to change the way that the Treasury assesses investment, particularly environmental investment. Many of you may have heard of the so-called Green Book. It's meant to be the Bible for how the Treasury assesses spending priorities. Well, it's only green in name, I'll tell you that much. It's not green in terms of its intent. There's actually a principle in that book which says that spending decisions which deliver benefits now should always be prioritised and rated as more important than those which deliver benefits in the future. So it's hardwiring in a short-term approach rather than the kind of long-term approach that we need. We're working on how Labour can have that longer-term approach to sustainable public finances into the future and sustainable economic development, with a better assessment of how green investments will promote all of our wealth in the long run, as well as benefiting, of course, our environment. There really is no excuse anymore for failing to factor in the catastrophic costs that would come from climate change. We've known about all of this since Lord Stern said it, and before then, and since Alan Simpson has been saying it for many, many years, as well as other people in the room. There's no excuse for not taking those long-term costs into account, and there's no excuse for not putting that long-term investment into place either. Third, what does the Treasury need to do? Well, we need to promote investment in green technologies, not hinder it. Our country has lost hundreds if not thousands, of jobs in sectors like energy efficiency and onshore wind, because we've had a confused regulatory approach from government, one that's chopped and changed, and then eventually that's chopped off our potential for the development of the green economy. That's not good enough, and the government's allergy to intervention is stopping the kind of change that we need in so many different areas. If we're talking about the installation of charging points for electric cars, where there's complete confusion about whose responsibility that is, whether we're talking about the development of decentralised energy distribution, we really need to have a grip on these questions. Government isn't delivering on them at the moment. That's got to end. So we're working in the Treasury with our friends in DEFRA, with our friends in the business team, to make sure that we get over those problems. But last of all, we need to focus on Britain becoming a force for good in environmental global politics once again. We've done it before, and we need to do it now. There's a lot of people here who helped to develop Labour's thinking on the Climate Change Act, as rightly was remembered. 10 years on, it's still proving its worth, even in very, very difficult political circumstances. Poll after poll shows that British people value the UK being a leader on environmental issues. They understand the moral and economic case. Now we need to make sure we've got the practical policies in place to deliver that commitment. And we need to be the greenest government ever, not as Cameroony whitewash, but as a coherent programme that will deliver for our people, for our planet, and for animals. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for kicking us off there and really getting us fired up. We're next going to hear from Anna McMorrin, MP for Cardiff North, and take it away.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's absolutely fantastic to be here to address you all today. And we know that the facts are very, very clear. Our world is in trouble. Last year was our hottest ever. The past decade has been the hottest on record. There's no doubting that, and I know we're all here agreeing that, and that we must go further and faster than we've ever done before on tackling climate change. Average global temperatures keep on rising, and glaciers are receding. I was in the Arctic just 3 weeks ago. I saw with my own eyes the devastation. I spoke to scientists, to researchers who are working there, who are seeing year after year those receding, melting ice, land ice, not sea ice, and the changing Arctic, the changing Antarctic as well, which is going to cause that devastating change to our planet. And we can't just sit back any longer and just watch that. 10 years ago, we had the Climate Change Act. I'm really proud to have played my part in that act, as I worked for Friends of the Earth and then the Welsh Government, bringing in 3% year on year cuts in emissions. We had that as our pledge in the Welsh Government, and then the UK Government brought together this groundbreaking Climate Change Act, which has been fantastic. But now we do need to go further. It's not enough today to just say we're going to take action. We must actually take action. But we need to go further. Not enough has changed. We need to urge the UK government to play its part in those world talks, in those historic Paris Agreement with even greater ambition, and there isn't any time to waste. But every day we fail to act. We take a little step closer towards a fate that none of us want, a fate that will resonate through our future generations, and the damage that is being done to all of us. And, do you know, I speak as a Welsh MP as well, and I'm proud, and I keep saying this, and I think my colleagues, my English colleagues might be fed up with me for hearing this, me saying this time and time again, but I'm really proud in Wales that we've done something in Wales with the Welsh Labour government, and I'm glad I was part of that, is create a Future Generations Act. And that Future Generations Act sets out a statutory regime across all departments looking at what we're doing for our future and our children's future. It's looking at our decision making, at the heart of decision making of all our public bodies. How is that going to affect us? And that will be looking at climate change and the environment and creating that sustainable economy that we so desperately need if we're going to address this problem. If we don't win this battle, and if Labour don't take a steer here, if Labour don't grasp this policy, then we're not going to win it, because the Tories will not win this. We hear the talk about, we hear Gove all the time. He talks the talk sometimes, not always. He talks the talk, but he will not walk the walk. And that is absolutely terrifying, and our children's futures depend on this. So it's up to us, it's up to you, to urge us all to go further. Urge policymakers, urge business leaders, civic society to go further and faster. Successful markets, our future generations, our civic society need a strong, clear, strategic vision, an effective regulatory regime. And we must challenge what the UK government is doing. We have a UK government that reneges on all of the things it says it's going to do. It reneges on decisions on the tidal lagoon, on electrification, on onshore wind. Where is that investment? Where is that transition to a proper, sustainable economy for our future? So the time has come to show that we care about the people whose fate we hold in our hands. We need to show we care about our future, about your future. And leadership is needed more than ever. Combating those vital issues, pollution, marine protected areas, sustainably reviving fisheries, building that resilience of coastal ecosystems, and a proper sustainable economy. And especially that critical action on climate change, which must cut across every single department in government and across every single thing that we do. And I want to see Labour policies that really break the mould. And that's up to you, that's up to us. And then we can become a UK government, Labour government, that can really deliver. Thank you.
We're going to hear from Sue Hayman, and then we're going to hear from Rebecca Long-Bailey. Sue, do you want to come up? Our Shadow Deputy Secretary. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And it's great to follow both Anna and Anneliese. What Anneliese says about the Treasury is absolutely true. We have a real focus from the Treasury on having the environment and green issues right at the heart of everything we do. And Anna is right, we need to learn from what they've done in Wales. There's been real ambition there from a Labour government, and we all need to look at that. So it's great to be back here. I addressed the SERA Rally at conference last year, and I would really like to thank SERA for all the hard work that they do in supporting the environmental policy development that we work on in the DEFRA team. Because we really are at a critical time looking at the future of Britain's environment. In March, as we all know, we're set to leave the European Union, and it's hard to imagine a Tory government that's done more to put us at so much risk, particularly in the area of environment protections. Just last week, we know that the Prime Minister was absolutely humiliated when she went to the EU to sell her failed Chequers plan. She has no support in her own party, she has no support in Parliament, she has no support in the EU. We have a government that's completely rudderless, and we know we've heard Michael Gove makes many warm words. He gives us many promises. But he is not giving the leadership in government that means our environment is going to be protected. Because we're looking at a disastrous no deal before us. And what's most concerning is the National Audit Office has recently brought out a report that says that DEFRA is nowhere near ready for when we leave. And if it's a no deal, the situation is only going to be worse. But I can tell you now, Labour will not stand for any chlorinated chicken from Donald Trump. The government is leading us into an environmental crisis, and only the Labour Party and a Labour government will take decisive action to protect our environment. It was the Labour government that established national parks, and as we know, brought in the landmark Climate Change Act. It's the Labour Party that will fight to clean up our air, protect our communities from devastating flooding, safeguard our flora and fauna, and tackle food insecurity. It's the Labour Party that will work to tackle climate change and improve public health by investing in clean energy and clean transport. And only Labour will do something to tackle the appalling decline of British biodiversity and protect our national habitats. And only Labour will protect communities like mine in West Cumbria from the terrible effects of flooding, and by properly managing river catchments and investing in flood defences. And when we return to Parliament in a couple of weeks, we will have the Agriculture Bill with its second reading. And what we'll be doing with the Labour Party is ensuring that the bill prioritises sustainable farming practices, that it enhances our environment and allows us to grow more of the food that we eat. Because even Michael Gove has been forced to accept that now is the moment for radical change in agricultural policy that rewards farmers for the conservation of natural resources alongside sustainable food production. I represent a large area in West Cumbria, a very large rural area, and I've always lived in rural communities. One thing I know is that rural communities need a Labour government. Labour needs to speak for all those millions of people in small towns and villages. And we have to fight for and represent everyone. The rural economy is important to this country. It's the lifeblood of rural communities. I want to see rural businesses and rural farms thrive and prosper. I want to work with them to ensure that at the same time our natural environment is improved. And we all know that these goals should not be mutually exclusive. Protecting our environment and tackling climate change is one of the biggest and most important tasks ahead of a Labour government. We'll have to work across all departments to achieve this, because we all know our planet's resources are finite and that time is running out. And that's why, she reaches over, we have been working cross-department from a subcommittee from the Shadow Cabinet to produce this document. Rebecca Longvallier will be speaking after me. It's great to see you, Becky. We have done this jointly along with other colleagues, because the only way we tackle climate change is by working together and not in silos. We know that only a green economy under a Labour government will be truly transformational for this country. We can lead the way internationally to protect our planet. Please support us and pick up a copy of this document when you leave. Thank you.
We're now going to hear from Becky Longvallier, the Shadow Place Secretary. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, and thanks for inviting me to speak tonight. And I echo Sue's sentiments in thanking SERA for all of their hard work and the fantastic events that they've put on this year on topics from plastic to clean energy to sustainable food. And it's absolutely thrilling, you know, we've got loads of people at this event tonight to see that we've got a Labour movement that's buzzing with energy and ideas about a green transformation that won't just leave a better world for our children, but will be a catalyst for our communities towards improving their quality of life and economic situation. And I just want to, say a big shout out to some of our team members. We've got a really good team around us in the Labour movement. From the two Allans, Alan Whitehead and Alan Simpson, to Barry Gardner, to Sue Hayman, who we've heard from already, Anneliese and Anna, fantastic speakers so far. We've got Clive Lewis on the Treasury team championing economic policies that favour green issues. We've got cabinet members and shadow cabinet members, past and present, all the way through to our backbench MPs and some of our newest MPs who have come forward with energy to speak on the benches about these important issues, and not to mention our industry friends and friends of the trade union movement who are tireless in championing these issues. And I'd like to say thank you for championing these issues and keeping up the fight, because sometimes when we look at our communities and all of the other devastating issues they're facing, from deprivation to local authority cuts, sometimes we're made to feel by some quarters that talking about green revolutions, talking about renewable energy, talking about environmental issues is a luxury in this day and age. And it's not a luxury, it's vital for all of our futures. You can probably tell from my accent that I'm from Salford and I grew up next to Manchester United's football ground. And nearby we had an area called Clifton Country Park, 48 hectares of beautiful countryside in the heart of Salford City, a place of open water, woods and fresh air. Now, it wasn't exactly the Serengeti, but it was a vital place that people across the city of Salford and beyond went to release themselves from the toils of daily life. And it comes as no surprise when I read reports that green spaces and the enjoyment of green spaces have a direct link to people's mental health. Now, I don't need to tell anybody in this room that the Labour movement has a proud history of environmentalism, right back to the Kinder Trespass of 1932, when working class ramblers from Manchester and Sheffield assembled on a moorland plateau in the Peak District to assert their right to access the countryside. That history runs through the creation of national parks after the Second World War, to a Labour government's instrumental role in pushing through the Kyoto Protocol in the late 90s. And then we had the Climate Change Act, a world-leading piece of legislation that was only made possible by a Labour government dedicated to tackling climate change. But as I said when I started, too often environmental issues are viewed by many as a luxury concern. And that might be part of the reason when I go around my constituency and speak to many of my neighbours, the most pressing concerns don't relate to climate change. Climate change sadly doesn't get a look in, even though it will affect their children's future in perhaps a more profound way than any other issue if we don't get it right. Now, we understand that, as with libraries, it's working people that benefit most from our common spaces when they flourish. It's also working people that are hit first when air in our inner cities is polluted, when flooding pushes up the price of food. As the Labour movement, we understand that the environment is not something separate from ourselves. It's the bedrock of our economy and security. It's the food we eat, it's the place we live, and it's the air we breathe. But our challenge as a party, I think, and a movement, is to get better at communicating that out across Great Britain, making the links between environmental quality and people's fundamental quality of life. We need to get to a place where it's not our ideas or those of highly paid specialists driving policy, but a bottom-up, irresistible clamour for change and revolution. Now, mass movements have been the engine of change, all social progress, I'd say, in history. And it's important to channel this when we go forward with our own energy agenda, because we're advocating dramatic changes that are going to tackle the environmental crisis at the required scale. And we've already started. Sue's already given a big shout out to our Green Transformation booklet, which essentially is a one-stop book that puts together all of our cross-departmental policies on green issues in one place. Now, that's not the end. It's a starting point. It's something that we can go out into our communities with and say, look, this is where we started, but we're going a long way further than this in the future. We've had extensive work done on our target to get 60% of our energy from renewable and low carbon sources by 2030. And I don't want to ruin my speech tomorrow, but I'll be talking about that in some detail. We've got Alan Whitehead, who's been putting together a groundbreaking book with other eminent authors and experts, some of whom are in this room tonight, on the future of decentralised energy and the renewable energy revolution, and how that will not just improve our lives, but bring down our bills and tackle fuel poverty. But without those all set to one side, we need to make sure that we reinvigorate our movement. And it's up to all of us in this room to work together to drive the excitement and change that our communities so desperately need. And I am heartwarmed at the changes that we've seen in recent years. I'm heartwarmed at the fight over the last 30 years by many people in our movement who have never given up. They've always spoken out passionately about this. And I think the tide is turning. If the storms of the last few weeks have told us anything, they've told us that climate change is here, and if we don't tackle it now, faster and harder than we ever planned to do before, we won't have a future. So thanks very much for listening to me tonight, and you've got some fantastic speakers to hear from. Thank you.
So, just to tell you an update on the running order, we're going to have Hilary Benn that's going to be speaking, and Gareth Thomas, Alan Simpson, and Paul Nowak from the TEC, and then a few others after that. So, Hilary.
No, it's fine. Jack, Melanie, friends. First of all, thank you very much for the kind invitation to be here today. We are celebrating what Labour has achieved in government, and Sue, who's had to run off, mentioned the national parks. Now, they didn't come about by accident. They came about because the post-war Labour government, dealing with the ravages of a, in many ways, destroyed Europe, we'd introduced additional rationing to help feed the Germans. And amid all of the challenges, the establishment of the National Health Service, the nationalisation of industries, implementing the welfare state, that Labour government found time to legislate for beauty. And they took the idea, a man called Arthur Hobhouse had drawn up a list in 1948 of all of the beautiful places in England he thought should be preserved for posterity. And the Labour government passed the National Parks Act in 1949, and I was the last in the line, because when I became the Environment Secretary, a little while after, the second report on the South Downs National Park appeared on my desk. And it made certain recommendations and said there's some disputed areas, and I said to my civil servants, well, we better go have a look. They said, I beg your pardon, Secretary, so what do you mean? Go have a look? I said, yes, I'm going to go have a look. Well, you can't do that. Well, why can't I go have a look? Because you might talk to people. What do you mean I might talk to people? And they said, you realise, Secretary of State, you are acting in a quasi-judicial capacity. And we reached a compromise in the end, a very British compromise. I said if someone said good morning to me, it was okay for me to say good morning back. And we spent the day travelling from one end of the proposed national park to the other. And lo and behold, the Secretary of State reached the conclusion that all of the disputed areas should be in the national park. And one of them was Ditchling. I don't know how many of you know Ditchling, but if you stand at the crossroads in Ditchling and you look at Ditchling Beacon, that wonderful part of the South Downs, I decided, right, we're going to go back to Ditchling to sign the legal orders, and we did it in the back garden of the Ditchling tea rooms with the Ditchling Beacon peering over the back wall. I thought it was smiling approvingly at the creation of the national park, and the significance was that the South Downs was the last in the list that Arthur Hobhouse had drawn up in 1948. So when people tell you on the doorstep, and they do sometimes to us, politics, nothing ever changes, you promise one thing, you do another. It's not true, is it? And we demonstrated that by the National Parks. We demonstrated it 10 years ago by the Climate Change Act. Now, Becky talked about an irresistible demand for change from the bottom up. And that is the story of how the Climate Change Act came to be on the statute book. Because do you remember the Big Ask campaign that Friends of the Earth ran? And I remember attending the Cabinet Subcommittee where we debated whether we should have a Climate Change Act, and we agreed in the end that we would, even though at that moment in time we weren't absolutely sure what we were going to put in the legislation. And therefore it was a combination of a bottom-up demand and political leadership. Courageous Labour political leadership that meant that we were the first country in the world to put the Climate Change Act on the statute book. And again, I happened to be the Environment Secretary at that time when the Climate Change Bill was introduced into Parliament. And I just want to say this, because we've heard from Becky and from Sue and others about what the next Labour government wants to achieve. But we have both a political and a moral responsibility as a party and a movement to ensure that we do pass on a safe, secure, sustainable world to the next generation. Last month, our third grandson was born. And by the time my 3 grandsons reach my advanced age, they will be sharing this planet with 3 times as many fellow citizens as I was sharing it with when I was born. Now, what is the challenge that we face as humankind at the beginning of the 21st century? It is to ensure that we have a safe, secure, sustainable world. We have to tackle climate change. When I visited the flooded areas all over the country in the wake of the 2007 floods, people would come up to me and say, Mr. Benn, do you think this is the result of our climate change? And the truth is, it is. We know about it. We've seen it. I've visited areas that are flooded. I've met people who have fled the village where they were born and brought up in Kenya. And they pitched up outside a town. They were living in benders made of bent-over twigs and scraps from the town rubbish tip. 1 woman, babe in arms. 5 other children living in a bender this diameter. Why did they come to the town? Because it had stopped raining where they were living. If it stops raining where you're living and you can't grow your crops, you're not going to stay to die of starvation. And if the sea levels rise, think of Bangladesh. Sea levels rise in the way that some scientists predict. Believe you me, Bangladesh is moving house. That's 140 million people moving house. And they'll probably try and move next door. So human beings have a great desire and urge to survive. And that's why we have a moral and a practical responsibility to play our part. And the last thing I want to say, touching on Brexit, is this. When I went to the Bali climate change talks in 2007, leading the British delegation, and what we managed to achieve on that occasion was to at least keep the door open to a continuation of the talks, which culminated in the Paris Agreement, I can tell you, because I've seen it with my own eyes, the power of Europe turning up and saying with one voice, okay, this is what we're prepared to contribute. Because the tackling of climate change, in some ways, is an adding up of the contributions that each of the countries of the world is able to make. Because you can go around the table and say, China, what are you going to do? United States, Europe, Canada, India. And then you can say, right, well, that's the reductions that people have committed to, and the Climate Change Act commits this country by law to reductions in our emissions. And then you turn to the scientists and say, could you tot up? And they go, well, we're looking at between 2 and 3 degrees. And then you turn back to people and say, is that okay with you? Because think of the consequences, even of what may seem very small temperature changes. The truth is the environment is held in a very delicate balance. And as soon as you begin to change it, then big consequences flow from that. And if we're going to deal with the challenges that the world faces, the only way in which humankind can do that is by cooperating with our neighbours and our friends, by working internationally. And at a time when we have an absolute abrogation of leadership on the part of the United States of America. If I thought President Bush was bad, I knew nothing compared to what the current occupant of the White House is doing. And that is a cause not for despair, It is a cause for renewed determination on the part of all of us, in the environmental movement and the labour movement, to say, this will not happen. We will make sure it doesn't happen, because we will continue to campaign to bring about change and to show the power of politics to transform people's lives. That is what our movement is about. And the reason I'm so keen to come here today is I want to thank SERA, along with everybody else, because the leadership which you as an organisation have given in flying the environmental flag, the green flag in the Labour Party, it's been a journey, has it not? And persuading everyone that it is, even in difficult economic times, it is just as important. You know what? It's even more important than it is when times are good. And long may you continue. And maybe some of us here will come back in 20, 30 years' time to celebrate the fantastic achievements of the next Labour government. Keep it up. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Hilary, and he's been a great supporter of SERA and shows what being in government is all about. And we're now going to hear from Gareth Thomas, the chair of the Co-op Party, and who we've done lots of work with over the years, and a good friend of SERA. Over to you, Gareth.
So I think the reason that I am speaking next after Hilary is because Jake knew that Hilary would focus on beauty at the start of his remarks and wanted someone appropriate to come after Hilary's speech. It is a delight also to have followed previous speakers like Anna McMorrin. Unlike her, I am not allowed to travel to the Arctic, but I do know what it's like to be out in the cold. And so it is a real pleasure to be allowed briefly into the warm embrace of a packed fringe meeting again here at SERA. Now, when SERA's answer to Stalin, Jake Sumner, approached me and said, would you come and speak at the Fringe? He said to me, Gareth, we're going to have superb speakers from giants of the last Labour government, like Hilary Benn and Lord Rooker. We're going to have amazing speeches from the most talented frontbenchers currently serving under Jeremy Corbyn, and you've heard from Rebecca Long-Bailey, Anneliese and Anna McMorrin. We're going to have bright, shiny stars of the future like Matthew Pennycook and Luke Pollard possibly speaking. But we need somebody else to fill the time. Would you come along and say a few words to help take the time up? And so with that ringing endorsement of my credentials to speak to a SERA audience, I accepted the challenge. And as I look around the room, what I am realising is that this is an audience that is close to being members of the Mensa of the political left. You are smart enough to have joined the Labour Party. You are talented and imaginative enough to have attended a SERA conference. So you are a SERA event, so you are almost eligible for membership of SERA. But as I'm looking around the room, I'm thinking that only one or two of you have passed the final hurdle for membership of the left's Mensa, and that is membership of the Cooperative Party. And so I urge you, if you remember nothing else about tonight, and frankly after my speech, what would be the point of remembering anybody else's speech? Remember that you have to join the Co-op Party. And I give you this reason as to why. We do need a transformational Labour government again, and I believe we're going to get one. But governments change, and unfortunately, after a Labour government, usually comes a Conservative government. And the lesson from when the last Labour government left office is that Conservatives always try and eat away at your legacy. And they certainly have done in terms of the environment. Where's the Department for Energy and Climate Change? Abolished. The Green Investment Bank? Privatised. A commitment to renewables? Well, no, not really. Fracking is now allowed. So what is the one idea that could perhaps survive beyond a Conservative government after a Jeremy Corbyn-led government. And I would generally offer you this. I think it's about energy cooperatives. And I would point to Germany and to America. An odd example to pick with Donald Trump as leader, but Germany and the US. In Germany, the government at the centre has committed to the introduction of to get all their energy from lower carbon sources by 2050. And what the Germans have found, those who are supporters of this move, is that the people who are most enthusiastic about that change are those who recognise that they have the chance to join and have a share in the management of a renewable energy or community-owned cooperative. And indeed, in Germany, there is rapid progress in the size of the renewable energy and cooperative movement. So much so that just a decade ago there were 8 renewable energy cooperatives. Now there are 800, powering huge amounts of green energy into Germany's homes and factories and businesses. And if you think the biggest one is called Greenpeace Energy, 110,000 customers, 23,000 of those are member owners. It gives you a sense of the change that can happen. And if you compare it to here in the UK, 90% of our energy comes from just 5 big global conglomerates who are responsible, according to Ofgem, for £1.4 billion of excess profits being generated. So that's you and I and our neighbours being exploited by these companies. Now, just imagine if the bulk of our electricity came from energy cooperatives that we were members of, that we helped to shape the direction of. That would survive a change of government after Jeremy Corbyn. It would survive because the Conservatives wouldn't want to take away people's power. They wouldn't want to close down an energy cooperative that people are helping to run. In the US, almost 15% of energy comes, despite Donald Trump, from renewable energy cooperatives. In New York, as we speak, one of the largest new cooperatives, Sullivan County, has almost 10,000 solar panels that it rents out. Here in Britain, cooperatives are springing up. Brixton Energy Co-op in South London, not a place, South London, that I think much good comes out of, but Brixton Energy is one exception to that rule. Bristol Energy Cooperative, already £120,000 raised in a community share offer. Westmill in Oxfordshire, Baywind that has set the example in Cumbria. Lots of different examples of energy cooperatives. And if Jeremy Corbyn's government gives a fresh push, as I believe he will, to energy cooperatives, your task, if I may leave you with a little bit of homework for when we get into government, is to harass the front bench and even odd backbenchers like me to keep the pressure up for more support and more investment in energy cooperatives. And just maybe we'll stop the Conservative government that comes after we've been in power for 4 elections from reversing that progress towards sustainable energy. Thanks very much.
Gareth, bringing humour into the Green movement. We're not always remarked for that, but certainly raised a few laughs. We're going to move on to Alan Simpson now. He was a former MP for Nottingham South, I think it was, and has been advising Shadow Chancellor on sustainability. And so, really interested in what you're going to say.
Thanks, Jake, and thanks very much for the opportunity to sing the praises of so many people in the Labour Party and to offend so many at the same time, and I want to do my best to honour both of those. So let's begin with the first part of a good news, bad news, good news wrap-up. The good news is that although I was an MP for 18 years, I have to say from the work that I've been doing for Jeremy and John since, the reality is that we have never had such rich political resources on the front benches and parts of the back benches of the Parliamentary Labour Party to really drive the climate agenda. This is a fantastic human resource, from Anneliese to Sue, to Alan Whitehead, to Barry Gardner, and to Clive Lewis, with whom I'm doing quite a bit of work now on reshaping all the Treasury ground rules to deliver the most challenging target of our times. And so that we're all clear about this, let me try to explain the evidence that we've had so far from the scientists. And I'll try to, excuse me if the scientific terms are a bit complex, but essentially the climate scientists have been saying to us, we have a 10-year window open to us as a society. Whether or not this registers with the Competence Arrangements Committee or not, the planet isn't going to hang around waiting for it to get on the agenda of the Labour Party conference. That 10-year window will require us to cut our carbon emissions in half in 2 parliaments, 10 years. If we do that, we will avoid some of the tipping points that would just fill us into chaos. And having done that, we'll then have to do the same in the decade that follows, and the same again in the third. That is the scale of the existential challenge that we have to address. And it's a non-negotiable one. To pretend otherwise and to set different timescales is to commit the folly of breaking into factions where we argue about the ideal place for a bus stop when the bus has already gone. And we cannot delude ourselves or our kids that is a responsible role for a transformational party to occupy. The good news on this is Jeremy and John and vast numbers of the Shadow Cabinet are actually locked into delivering that around key principles of democracy, decarbonisation and decentralisation. Now the bad news is, for the second year running, the environment doesn't even figure as an item on the conference main agenda. It is a travesty. It is a travesty that people within the machinery of the party say that there are no votes in the environment and climate. You look at the way in which the Tories are trying to drape themselves in this next week, and you'll know that their polling tells them that unless they can capture the ideas and support of the young and the green movement, they will never form a government again. But we have to fight to capture and maintain support of the young and the green movements if we want to form a government. And for all the value that this compilation report that Labour has just issued puts out, it will not deliver that obligation to cut UK carbon emissions in half in a decade. So we have to find other places to start from. And the good news is that we can pinch lots of ideas that are already up and running. And for me, they are the most exciting ideas of my life. I always wanted to be part of a revolution, but I think we never actually had the technical resources to deliver that. But now when I look around, we genuinely do, but we need bigger visionary ideas on what that means. And part of this is the pinching process. Gareth mentioned what's happening in Germany and what's happening in parts of the United States. And underpinning much of that is a completely different approach from the Treasury. It is the financial structures in Germany that deliver soft loans, 1% or down to 0, and in some cases down to offering 17.5% rebates if you deliver energy refurbishments to deliver zero carbon homes or energy plus housing. It's the states in parts of the USA that are imposing carbon duties on their grid operators to deliver annual carbon reductions. It is the Norwegian government that has said, and the Treasury there said, all public sector vehicles acquisitions can now only be electric vehicles. It is the German banks that have underpinned the shift into the development and deployment now of the first fleet of hydrogen trains. It is the Dutch government that has said we're going to run train services on clean energy. It's the Danes who, post the 73 oil crisis, said we're going to redefine energy, not as a product, but as a service. It is illegal to sell energy for a profit. And it changes the whole mindset. And democratisation is part of this process. It is the core of the process. Because if we're not careful, we will simply see a shift from a set of dirty cartels to a set of clean cartels. And the public will get no say and no ownership in it. Gareth is right to sing the praises of co-ops. I'm a member of two. But the truth is we're not proper co-ops anymore. I can tell you what a co-op is. 177744 is my mum's co-op number. She never had a penny to be an investor, but she got the benefits of being in the co-op. It was that sense of the solidarity that being a member of the co-op movement had. And in this country, what a pivotal requirement is to have the same rights in Britain as they have in Denmark and in Germany, where those co-ops can sell to local people at local prices, something closer to wholesale prices of energy rather than retail. And you talk to people on the doorsteps in towns and villages across Germany and Denmark, and they'll tell you about saving the planet. And it was us who had to ask them whether the bills made a difference. They all laughed and said, oh, it doesn't. But that we need to harness exactly the same set of inclusive ownership of a transformational idea. It is 10 years on from the Climate Change Act, but it's also 200 years on from the foundation of the first publicly owned energy companies in Britain. It was 1817 when that revolutionary Trotskyist organisation known as the Police Commissioners set up their first public energy company on the streets of Water Street, in the corner of Water Street in Manchester, or as my dad always said, bloody Manchester. And people came to look at this flickering gas light on the corner of the police station. They said, marvellous, marvellous. Never catch on, but marvellous. No. Within 10 years, that had become the Manchester Municipal Gas and Water Company. In the years between 1817 and the 1880s, that saw a prolific growth of publicly owned, locally publicly owned municipal utility companies. It took Parliament about half a century to catch up. And these were funded by bonds, municipal bonds, where people put their 5 shillings, £5, £50 for the rich, into something that delivered energy security and dramatically enhanced the quality of life, because out of the proceeds of those, localities built museums, parks, libraries, swimming pools, gardens. This was the environmental enhancement out of a sense of the collective responsibility for their own securities. And we have to do the same now with clean. We have to do what Tony Benn always urged us to do, which was to tie our ropes together. And the vision that's required is to see that this is not just about generating clean energy, but using the surfaces to deliver whole areas, whole urban and town areas that are clean air zones, where only clean vehicles have access, where as in Copenhagen, almost 43% of the journeys to work and to study are either by bike or by foot, because it's safe and clean to do so. And we need to make the environment and a secure future the only future that we are prepared to offer our kids in a non-negotiable, transformational timescale. And I know that if we act irreverently, that's the only way that we're going to do this. To try to talk about longer time scales is to delude ourselves. Pushing it beyond this first 10 years will not end the problem. In fact, it'll kick the can down a road that won't exist. So we have to harvest all the intellectual powers and the irreverence that is in this room and inside the Parliamentary Labour Party and inside the parties and localities around the country to drive those ambitions that John and Jeremy give voice to every week that we talk about this. And that is to have the transformational commitment to change in a timetable which will give our kids any prospect of survival. That is, for me, the sole purpose of why I think I'm interested in getting involved in politics, because I think that when Tony Benn talked in his final years about the challenge facing us, it was to form a new grand coalition between the young and the young at heart. And if we understand that if we tie our ropes together in that way, we genuinely can change the future.
So we're going to hear from Paul Nowak now, the Deputy General Secretary of the TUC. Trade unions have been a good friend and have taken some really good steps recently of commitments to tackling climate change. Great to hear from you. You spoke last year, it's fantastic, and we'll hear from Ben after that.
Okay, well thanks Jake, and thanks Melanie, and thanks to SERA for the opportunity to say a few words. I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you today to mark 10 years of Labour's Climate Change Act. Delighted to welcome you to my home city of Liverpool, and delighted to bring you greetings and solidarity on behalf of the TUC, our 48 unions, and the 5.5 million men and women up and down the country that we represent. Now this is a really apposite time to be having this debate and this rally, because all of this government's actions show, with their focus on internal division and infighting, that climate change has dropped completely off their agenda, and we can't afford to let it drop off the political agenda in this country. We've seen just this year, whether it's the heat wave, extreme weather event, just the physical manifestations of the fact that climate change is real, it's pressing, it's been driven by human activity, and unless we have pressing and urgent action, it will be catastrophic for our planet. So that's an important piece of context, but we're grappling with climate change at the same time that we're also grappling with all the big challenges in our workplaces and in our communities. Nobody knows what the final shape of a Brexit deal will look like, if in fact the government manages to secure a Brexit deal. We know there are huge changes coming down the road in our workplaces, changes brought by automation, by digitalisation, and we're having to grapple with those at the same time as grappling with climate change. And I think we have to see those as opportunities as well as challenges. Just three things really from the trade union movement that inform our approach. The first is this: if we're serious about tackling climate change, we have to be equally serious about just transition. And I don't mean just transition just as a political slogan or as warm words, but engaging with workers up and down the country about what tackling climate change means to them, to their jobs, their communities, and how we are going to involve them in tackling climate change. Because this can't be something we do to people, we have to bring people every step of the way. It's essential that we have workers' voices at the heart of this debate. Talk about just transition to people living in coalfield communities when those pits closed down 30 years ago and they look at you with the right smile. Talk about just transition to steel workers who've been put out of work because of the unfair playing field, the dumping of Chinese steel on the UK market. So we genuinely need to engage working people, their unions, and thinking about how we tackle climate change. I think we need a Labour government to start that conversation, because the second thing that we need is a smart, enabling, interventionist government. And we're not going to get a smart, enabling, interventionist government with the current mob who are in number 10. So we need a Labour government committed to working with trade unions, committed to a real industrial strategy that puts tackling climate change at its heart, because I refuse to believe that we've got some sort of false choice between good quality employment, sustainable employment, and tackling climate change. The two things need to go absolutely hand in hand. We need a government that's going to deliver real industrial strategy, not just talk the talk around industrial strategy, and that's going to require a Labour government. And the third thing, maybe just to stress this point, is that if we're serious about tackling climate change, serious about just transition, serious about getting that smart, enabling, interventionist, active government, serious about getting Jeremy and the Labour Party into government, then we need to work together. Not trade unionists versus climate change campaigners, not energy workers versus environmentalists, but all of us pulling together in the trade union and Labour movement. My vision of socialism has always been informed by belief that economic and social justice can go hand in hand with protecting our planet and tackling climate change. We owe it to my kids' generation, to everybody in this room and beyond, to work together to get that Labour government to tackle climate change and to secure the future of our planet. Thanks very much.
So we're coming to the final few speakers, and we're going to hear from Ben Bradshaw in a sec. Just in case some of you arrived a bit later, most of our women speakers were at the beginning and the male speakers at the end. It just sort of worked. It wasn't meant to be that way, it just sort of worked out that way. So just in case you came and thought, well, we're going to hear from Ben Bradshaw. SERA last year, he did such a good heckle, we decided to invite him back and address the SERA Rally.
Yeah, I gate crashed the SERA Rally last year out of frustration that the Labour movement were being denied a proper debate on Brexit. And I stood up and said, there's no such thing as a green Brexit, and if you care about the environment, you've got to stop Brexit, and we can stop Brexit. I think most of the people there thought I was a bit mad. It doesn't look that mad now, does it? We've got a fantastic motion, conversated last night, commits Labour to opposing a Tory Brexit deal, commits us to trying to get a Labour government, but there's not going to be a general election because Tory MPs won't vote for one, and in those circumstances campaigning for another referendum, including, let's make clear, including the option of staying in. Now, my message to all the Green groups here tonight is the time for constructive ambiguity on Brexit is over. It's time for you to get off the fence, support a people's vote, and prepare to campaign for a Remain vote in that people's vote. Too many of you are playing along with Michael Gove. I'm sorry to have to say this. He talks a good talk on green stuff. It's total rubbish. It's lies. Look at what the government are actually proposing. Nothing, and no proper legal enforcement backstop. No way of enforcing any of this stuff. So let's get real about this. Stop playing along with a crumbling, a failing and divided government. Get with the game on a people's vote and help support those of us who are fighting both to save our country and to save our environment. And if you look back at Salzburg, it was very interesting. I mean, it's been very scantily reported this, but one of the reasons that the EU27 and the Commission played hardball with Theresa May, because they read those reports about Liam Fox going around the world saying that we were going to scrap all our food safety legislation. We were going to, in return for a trade deal with Trump, that we were going to scrap all our environmental safeguards in return for a trade deal for Trump. That's what the Tory Brexiteers' agenda is about, and it's time you and the environmental movement woke up to that, joined us in the fight to stop Brexit and to save the environment. That's the only message I've got for us tonight. Nothing else matters in the next few months. We can get onto a Labour government and a fantastic programme of a Labour government, and Alan's absolutely right. It's a disgrace there was no debate on the floor of conference on the environment or on climate change. But the reason for that is the hard left has made us spend a whole day talking about more Labour MPs. That's what we should be talking about. Fighting to get more Labour MPs, fighting to get a Labour government, and fighting to stop this disastrous Tory environment scrapping Brexit. Thank you.
And our final speaker, Luke Pollard, is not here, is he? No, I'm just checking that Luke isn't here because he was due to speak. So some of our other speakers weren't able to make it tonight. And so our final speaker this evening, who just footed it over, is Lisa Nandy. Fantastic Lisa Nandy. So it's finished tonight. Thank you very much.
Out of interest, who was speaking before me and why are they that tall? Or am I quite short? Was it you, Ben? Of course it was. Thanks very much, and I'm sorry to be a bit late, but it turns out the timing was perfect. And thanks very much to Jake and to Melanie and to everyone involved with SERA for putting the environment back on the agenda at Labour Conference again for another year. At a moment that couldn't be more critical for us, because with everything that's happening around Brexit and the negotiations and the very real prospect of us fragmenting and fracturing our ties and our commitments with the European Union that has delivered such progress on the environment, on the quality of our air, on the cleanliness of our rivers, on our ability to deal with the climate crisis. This is Labour's legacy that is at stake. We were the party that built the road to Paris, the climate change agreement. We were the party who created our first ever Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change, and we were the party that brought in the Climate Change Act that set us on a path to being able to deliver that historic agreement a couple of Decembers ago. This is decades of progress, Labour's legacy, Britain's legacy at risk. We need a Brexit deal that defends our ability to cooperate across the EU and drive up standards, not just here, but everywhere. And there was a time, if you remember, when David Cameron rode around with huskies and promised vote blue to go green. But remember what happened next. Then he appointed a climate sceptic as his environment secretary. He banned wind farms. Beware Brexiteer right-wingers promising a new compassionate conservatism, because we've been here before and we know where this leads. And if you scratch the surface with what we're hearing from Michael Gove, now this new green focus for the Tories generates maximum noise but for minimal impact. Promises are unaccountable, decisions that are being kicked down the roads for decades. So let's not believe for 1 minute what we're hearing from this Tory government, because they've taken a wrecking ball to our communities and they're about to do the same to our environmental legacy as well. But there's a lesson for us here too, is that the last few years should have taught us that action in Westminster and Whitehall is no substitute for building this country and our values from the ground up. And you have to take people with you if you're going to win. And that means that we have to go to where people are and we have to win the argument across this country on our own terms. And I think this means a shift in approach from the way that we've done this before. There is no shortcut to the grind of democratic politics. If I have one great regret in the last 8 years as the MP for Wigan, it's that the first time I had a meaningful debate with my constituents about the EU was after David Cameron called that referendum. After years and years of there being drip-fed stories, lies about the European Union and what it meant for people, we should have been out there, we should have been making the case, we should have been advocating for change, and we should have been building that support from the ground up. So let's not take this as the moment when we say defeat and all is lost, and let's not take this as a moment where we try to shortcut or bypass the democratic process. Let's take this as a rallying call. They've gone up a gear, we've got to go up a gear. We've got to get out there into our communities and argue for change and get that clamour of noise for change coming from the people and not just from their politicians. You know, I've seen this in action myself. My proudest moment as the Shadow Energy Secretary was working with Labour councils in towns and cities across Britain. We forget, don't we, because we haven't been in power nationally for 8 years, that we are in power in almost every major town and city in this country. It's Labour that is in government. And so together, we set out plans that would have cut 20% off Britain's carbon footprint. So while you had a Tory government taking a wrecking ball to that approach and worsening Britain's air pollution crisis and setting us back on the path of progress on climate change, we were doing it. We were showing people what a difference Labour can make when we're in power. And innovation is happening in all of those towns and cities, and change is coming. This is the lesson, I think, of 13 years of Labour government, is that the policy designed and executed in Whitehall can be dismantled very quickly. But the energy co-op, designed and run and co-owned by hundreds of local people, lasts and survives, and what's more, it thrives. It brings enormous benefits to us too. When I first started that job as the Shadow Energy Secretary, the first thing that I did was go and talk to some of my constituents about what they thought. I mean, we've got this mining past in Wigan that we're incredibly proud of. We powered the world for a generation, and we were incredibly proud of the role that we played in it. But we know the impact now that fossil fuels have on our children's health. Nobody in Wigan will want their children to go back down the mines and do that difficult, dangerous, dirty work. And so they said to me, well, the trouble is that too often what we see is when people say they're going to tackle climate change, it means that our jobs are lost and our energy bills go up. Well, we've got to have a better vision for that. And we've built one quietly, steadily across the country. That's what Labour councils have been doing. They've been setting up municipal energy schemes from Barking and Dagenham to Nottingham to Newcastle to Plymouth, and they've been showing people then what benefits that brings, because we know that economic justice, social justice and environmental justice aren't pitted against one another, they're exactly intertwined. And that's what councils like Bury, where Rishi Shori is the leader, have been doing. They've set up restored that municipal energy, and they're using the benefits of that to build libraries and parks and keep services open that otherwise would have closed, and people are seeing the benefits of that. They're pioneering where the government is failing, but they lack the power to do it. Because, you know, they know, as we know, that this is where innovation and change comes from. But when you look at the situation nationally, it is a mess. Pollution from power stations might be falling, but pollution from transport is flatlining and even rising. And in the north of England, we're not even allowed to run our own trains, let alone decide what sort of impact they have on our communities and whether our children can breathe easily as well. And this is the problem, really, about not having power closer to home. Because over in Barnsley, they're saying, well, hang on a minute, we used to power this country through the mines and now our kids have to work in ASOS packing boxes for the minimum wage. But over in Silicon Valley, where the federal government has got real power, they've cut taxes for clean investment and they've brought in some of the toughest environmental standards in the world, and they've created apprenticeships, and as a result their kids are designing the battery technology of the future while ours are assembling solar panels. Well, why shouldn't those kids from Barnsley have the chance to power us through the next clean generation, just as their parents and grandparents powered us through the last? This means setting the right framework nationally for a future Labour government, handing over power, and then letting towns and cities across Britain develop those radical plans that match the ambition and the power that lies in those towns themselves. And you know, this for me is really central. The green agenda is right at the centre of what it means to be Labour and what a Labour government can do. Because in recent years, I think we wrongly came to believe that our mission in the Labour Party was about redistribution of wealth. But actually, we forgot that from Keir Hardie to Nye Bevan, we've always been about the fight for an equality of power in its widest form. And I see clean energy and the fight to tackle climate change not just as the greatest crisis of our generation, but actually of the greatest opportunity. And that's the ambition that we need to have going forwards, not just to protect and defend everything that we've fought for and we've won, but to take this up again now and make sure that we build something that lasts for generations. Thank you.
That draws the rally to a conclusion. Thank you for all the speakers. We've heard some great contributions tonight, and it's fantastic. I think probably one of the best rallies we've ever had. There's actually, after this, there's a SERA reception with the SASA, which is starting at 7:30, so please stick around, and there's some drinks available, and enjoy the rest of the programme. Please come to the future events tomorrow, and thank you for coming, because if you didn't come, then the speakers will be speaking to an empty audience. And so, thank you.
Alright, Mike? Alright. Yeah, you can stay for a drink at the reception. Or you got something else? Yeah. How are things in Oxford? Okay. Yeah, I know you're right. It's Joe who works for me, Mike, who's a coach in Oxford. Yeah. No, I'm speaking at the reception, not at the rally. What have you been doing? A little bit, 1 or 2 England by far. They can't be done.